Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the one destined to protect you. Banishment was supposed to break her, leaving her to perish in the unforgiving winter wilderness. Instead, it forged a fierce mother. 5 years after her exile, her secret child steps into the king's brutal arena, shattering his invincible champion in seconds. Cold drafts swept through the cavernous great hall of the Crawford estate, but the chill in the air was nothing compared to the freezing glare of Alpha King Dimitri Crawford. He sat upon his carved oak chair, a massive figure of authority and ruthless power, staring down at the woman who had, until an hour ago, been his cherished mate. Madeline Hayes stood in the center of the stone floor, her wrists bound by heavy iron chains that chafed her pale skin. Around her, the murmurs of the court nobles and pack elders buzzed like a hive of angry hornets. She looked up at Dimitri, her heart shattering into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The man she loved, the man who had promised her eternity beneath the silver moon, was looking at her as if she were nothing more than dirt beneath his boots. "The evidence is irrefutable," Dimitri's voice boomed, echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings. He tossed a bundle of parchment onto the floor. "Letters bearing your personal seal, Madeline. Letters sent to the Northern Ridge Pack, detailing the vulnerabilities of our border patrols. You traded our pack's safety for gold." "They are forged, Dimitri," Madeline pleaded, her voice cracking but refusing to break entirely. "I have never conspired against you or this pack. Someone planted those in my chambers. Look at the wax. It's the wrong shade of crimson. Please, you know me." "I thought I knew you," Dimitri sneered, his golden eyes flashing with the untamed wolf within him. "But clearly I was blinded by a pretty face and false devotion." Standing just a few paces to Dimitri's right was Lady Catherine Dupont, a high-ranking noblewoman of the pack who had always coveted the title of Luna. Catherine's face was arranged in an expression of mock sympathy, but her dark eyes danced with malicious triumph. Madeline knew instantly. Catherine had orchestrated this entire farce. She had paid the couriers, forged the documents, and whispered poison into Dimitri's ear while he slept. "Dimitri, please!" Madeline tried one last time, taking a step forward before the guards yanked her chains backward. A sudden sharp cramp seized her lower abdomen, making her gasp. Her hand instinctively fluttered over her stomach. A secret lay hidden there, barely 4 weeks old. She had planned to tell him tonight, by the warmth of their hearth. She was carrying his heir. But as she looked into his unrelenting, cruel eyes, a sudden fierce realization washed over her. He did not trust her. He had not investigated her claims. He had chosen the word of his sycophantic court over the bond of his mate. If she told him about the child now, he would either claim she was lying to save her own skin, or worse, he would rip the child from her arms once it was born and execute her anyway. "I have made my decision," Dimitri declared, standing to his full, intimidating height. The room fell dead silent. "For the crime of high treason, the penalty is death. However, out of respect for the bond we once shared, I will show mercy. Madeline Hayes, you are stripped of your rank. You are hereby banished from the Crawford Pack and all allied territories. You will be cast out into the Whispering Peaks without provisions. If you are found within our borders by tomorrow's sunrise, my guards have orders to kill you on sight." A collective gasp echoed through the hall. The Whispering Peaks in the dead of winter was a death sentence. To send a solitary woman into those treacherous, wolf-infested mountains was a cruel mockery of mercy. Madeline did not cry. The tears simply refused to fall. She lifted her chin, her green eyes hardening as she stared directly into Dimitri's soul. "I accept my banishment, Your Grace. But know this, the rot in your kingdom is not leaving through these doors today. It is standing right beside you." She shot a venomous glare at Catherine, who visibly flinched. "Get her out of my sight," Dimitri growled, turning his back to her. That night, the snow fell in blinding horizontal sheets. Madeleine was thrust out of the heavy iron gates of the fortress, wearing nothing but a simple woolen cloak over her linen dress. The heavy thud of the gates closing behind her was the final punctuation on her old life. The cold was immediate and agonizing. The wind howled through the barren trees, biting through her thin clothes like daggers of ice. Every step through the knee-deep snow was an agonizing battle. She wrapped her arms tightly around her torso, whispering silent promises to the tiny life growing inside her. "I will not let you die. I will not let him win." For 3 days and 3 nights, Madeleine wandered the desolate slopes of the whispering peaks. She ate handfuls of snow for hydration and chewed on bitter pine needles to stave off the gnawing hunger. Her boots were soaked through, her toes blackened by frostbite, and her vision began to blur with the terrifying edges of hypothermia. On the 4th evening, her legs finally gave out. She collapsed into a snowdrift, the icy embrace feeling dangerously warm and inviting. As her eyes fluttered closed, she thought she saw a flickering orange light in the distance. She awoke hours later, surrounded by the smell of roasting meat and burning peat. She was lying on a lumpy mattress covered in thick bear pelts. Standing over the hearth was an elderly man with wild white hair and a deeply lined face. "Drink," the man commanded gruffly, pressing a wooden cup of hot broth to her cracked lips. This was Tobias Fletcher, a disgraced apothecary who had exiled himself from human society decades ago. He lived in the ruins of an old logging cabin near the frozen River Trent, surviving off the land and his vast knowledge of medicinal herbs. Tobias didn't ask questions. He simply saw a dying woman and chose to save her. Over the next few months, as the harsh winter melted into a muddy spring, Madeleine proved her worth. She learned to set snares, to identify edible fungi, and to brew potent salves from mountain flora. She worked tirelessly, fueled by a burning, unyielding determination. When the time came, Tobias delivered her child, a boy. She named him Leith. From the moment he took his first breath, Leith was extraordinary. As the son of an alpha king, the lichen blood ran thick and potent in his veins. By his first birthday, he was walking and communicating with the intelligence of a much older child. By his third, he possessed the physical strength to lift logs that a grown man would struggle with. Madeleine raised him with a fierce love, but also with discipline. She knew the world was dangerous, especially for an unregistered rogue werewolf cub with royal blood. She taught him combat. She taught him how to mask his scent, how to move without making a sound, and how to harness the immense, explosive energy that bubbled beneath his skin. "Mama," little Leith asked one evening, sitting by the fire, his striking golden eyes, a painful replica of Dimitri's, staring up at her. "Why do we hide in the woods?" Madeleine stroked his dark hair, a bitter smile touching her lips. "Because, my little wolf, the people in the stone castles do not understand true strength. They fear what they cannot control. And you, Leith, you are a force of nature." 5 years had passed since Madeleine was cast into the snow. In the capital city of Oakhaven, the kingdom had grown dark and oppressive. King Dmitri Crawford ruled with an iron fist, his temper volatile and his heart turned to stone. His union with Lady Catherine Dupont had been a disaster. She had suffered 3 miscarriages, and the pack was growing anxious over the lack of a proper heir. The absence of his true mate had slowly driven Dmitri's inner wolf to the brink of madness, leaving him prone to violent outbursts and deep, suffocating depressions. To distract the restless populace, Dmitri hosted the Great Melee, an annual tournament of brutal gladiatorial combat where the strongest fighters from neighboring packs came to test their mettle. The grand prize was a heavy chest of gold and a rare artifact, a vial of moonlight nectar, a legendary healing serum harvested from the sacred western groves. Far out in the whispering peaks, the cabin was quiet. Tobias lay in his bed, his breathing shallow and rattling. A mysterious sickness had taken hold of the old man's lungs, and traditional herbs were doing nothing to stop the decay. "He needs the nectar," Madeline whispered to herself, packing a small rucksack. She looked at Leith, who was now 5 years old, but stood as tall and broad-shouldered as a healthy 8-year-old human boy. His senses were razor-sharp, his muscles coiled with unnatural tension. "We are going to the city," Madeline told him, handing him a thick woolen cloak with a deep hood. "You must keep this hood up. You must not speak to anyone, and you must stay close to me. Do you understand?" Leith nodded solemnly. "I understand, Mama. We are going to save Grandpa Tobias." The journey to Oakhaven took 4 days. When they arrived, the city was a chaotic sea of banners, roaring crowds, and the overwhelming scent of roasted meats, spilled ale, and nervous sweat. The Grand Arena, a massive circular structure of stone and timber, dominated the city centre. Madeline paid the entry fee for the spectator stands with the last of her trapped furs. She needed to find a way to enter the tournament, perhaps under a disguised alias, to win the nectar. She left Leith sitting on a wooden bench near the lower tier, instructing him strictly to stay put while she sought out the registration master. In the center of the sand-filled arena stood Gideon Croft. Gideon was Dmitri's personal champion, a hulking monstrosity of a werewolf, standing nearly 7 feet tall, covered in thick scars, and wielding a massive battle-axe. Gideon was infamous for his cruelty. He didn't just defeat his opponents, he broke them, leaving them crippled for life. Dmitri sat in the royal viewing box high above, resting his chin on his hand, looking utterly bored. Beside him, Catherine sat rigidly, her face plastered in fine powders to hide the dark circles of her own miserable existence. "Is there no one else?" Gideon roared to the crowd, wiping blood from his knuckles. He had just thrown a seasoned warrior from the eastern valleys out of the ring with a single, bone-shattering punch. "Is this the best the kingdom has to offer? A bunch of weak, pathetic pups!" Gideon strutted around the perimeter of the ring, mocking the audience. As he passed the lower tiers, he spotted a cloaked figure hurrying back down the steps. It was Madeline, who had just been rejected by the registration master for lacking a noble sponsor. "You there?" Gideon sneered, pointing a massive, calloused finger at her. "Running away, peasant. Maybe you'd like to step into the ring and entertain the king?" Madeline ignored him, keeping her head down, trying to reach the bench where she had left Leith. But Gideon, drunk on adrenaline and cheap ale, leaped over the wooden barrier. He grabbed Madeline roughly by the shoulder, spinning her around. Her hood fell back, revealing her striking green eyes and familiar features. High up in the royal box, Dmitri suddenly sat up straight. His heart gave a violent, painful jolt. The wind shifted, carrying a scent he hadn't smelled in 5 agonizing years. lily of the valley and rain. Madeline. Before Dmitri could even process what he was seeing, before Gideon could utter another insulting word, a blur of motion erupted from the benches. A small figure in a heavy cloak shot forward with the speed of a fired arrow. "Get your hands off my mother!" a child's voice rang out, clear and furious. Gideon looked down, laughing a booming, ugly laugh, as he saw the small boy standing between him and the woman. "What's this? A little stray pup wants to play hero." Gideon reached out to casually swat the boy aside like a bothersome fly. What happened next defied all logic and reason. As Gideon's massive hand descended, little Laith didn't flinch. Instead, the boy sidestepped the blow with supernatural agility. He grabbed Gideon's extended wrist with both of his small hands. A sudden, terrifying wave of pure, concentrated alpha energy exploded from the 5-year-old child. It was a suffocating aura, so dense and heavy that the entire arena fell dead silent, the crowd gasping for air. Laith twisted his hips, utilizing his lichen strength, and pulled. Using Gideon's own massive momentum against him, the tiny cub flipped the 7-foot champion over his shoulder. Crack! Gideon hit the hard-packed sand of the arena floor with a force that shook the wooden stands. The air rushed out of the champion's lungs in a pathetic wheeze. Before Gideon could even attempt to recover, Laith leaped into the air and brought his small, booted foot down squarely on Gideon's chest plate. The sound of ribs fracturing echoed into the stunned silence of the Colosseum. Gideon, the undisputed, invincible champion of the Crawford pack, lay paralyzed beneath the foot of a 5-year-old boy, groaning in agony. Laith stood over the fallen giant, his chest heaving. His hood had fallen back during the scuffle. The midday sun illuminated his face, his sharp jawline, his untamed dark hair, and most strikingly, his piercing, luminous golden eyes. In the royal box, Dmitri was no longer breathing. He gripped the stone railing so hard the rock began to crack beneath his fingers. It wasn't just the boy's face, an undeniable miniature reflection of his own. It was the aura, the explosive, dominant power that had just radiated from the arena floor, carried the exact, unmistakable scent of the royal Crawford bloodline. It was his power. It was his scent. Dimitri's golden eyes locked on to the boy and then shifted to the woman rushing forward to grab the child's hand. "Madeline," Dmitri whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of horror, guilt, and a sudden, overwhelming possessiveness. He vaulted over the railing of the royal box, landing heavily in the lower tiers, his eyes fixed on the family he had thrown away. Silence crashed over the colossal arena. It was not a peaceful quiet, but a suffocating, heavy stillness that pressed against the eardrums of every spectator present. The roaring crowd of thousands had been struck entirely mute. In the center of the sun-drenched sand, a 5-year-old boy stood victorious over the broken body of the kingdom's most feared warrior. Dimitri's boots hit the arena floor with a heavy, ominous thud. As he slowly straightened his massive frame, his golden eyes were locked onto the small boy and then shifted to the woman whose hand the child was fiercely clutching. Madeline did not cower. 5 years ago, she would have dropped her gaze, terrified of his volatile wrath. Now, tempered by the brutal winters of the Whispering Peaks and the feral instinct of a mother protecting her young, she stood as rigid as a mountain pine. She pulled Laith slightly behind her leg, shielding him, her chin tilted upward in ultimate defiance. "Madeline," Dmitri breathed, the name tearing from his throat like rough sandpaper. The scent of lily of the valley and rain washed over him, violently ripping away the fog of depression and madness that had plagued his mind for half a decade. You are alive." His eyes dropped to the boy. The child was a mirror image of Dimitri's own youth. The same sharp jaw, the same unruly dark hair, and those unmistakable glowing golden eyes of an alpha heir. The raw power radiating from the boy was intoxicating, a pure distillation of the Crawford royal bloodline. "My son," Dimitri whispered, taking a desperate step forward, his hand outstretched, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Do not take another step, Your Grace," Madeline warned, her voice devoid of any warmth. It was a command, laced with a newfound, terrifying authority. "And do not presume to claim what you threw away." Up in the royal box, Lady Catherine Dupont had turned the color of spoiled milk. Her meticulously crafted world was crumbling before her eyes. The woman she had condemned to a freezing death had returned, and worse, she had returned with an impossibly powerful air. Panic, sharp and acidic, clawed up Catherine's throat. "Guards!" Catherine shrieked, her voice cracking hysterically over the silent arena. "Captain Montgomery, arrest that woman immediately! She is a banished traitor! She has violated the King's decree by crossing into Oakhaven. Execute her and seize the rogue pup!" A dozen heavily armored members of the Silver Guard drew their broadswords, the metallic shing echoing sharply. Captain Montgomery, a seasoned veteran, hesitated, his eyes darting between the hysterical Lady Catherine and the frozen Alpha King. "Stand down," Dimitri roared. The sheer force of his Alpha command released a shockwave of dominance that drove several guards to their knees. He turned his ferocious glare up to the balcony, his golden eyes blazing with a murderous, unhinged fury. "If a single blade is raised against her, I will personally sever the hands of the man holding it." Dimitri turned his attention back to Madeline. The agony in his chest was unbearable. He saw her ragged, homespun clothes, the weathered lines around her beautiful green eyes, and the sheer defensive hostility radiating from her posture. "Madeline, please," Dimitri pleaded, dropping all pretenses of royal dignity. "I didn't know. I swear to the goddess I didn't know you were with child." "Why didn't you tell me? You didn't give me the chance," Madeline stated coldly. "You condemned me to the ice without a trial, based on the forged letters of a jealous snake. You chose the whispers of your court over the bond of your mate. Laith is my son. He survived because of Tobias Fletcher, not you. He subdued despite you." Little Laith peeked around his mother's leg, his golden eyes narrowing at the massive king. "You are the bad man," the 5-year-old growled, his childish voice rumbling with an unnatural bass. "You made Mama cry. If you try to hurt her again, I will break you like I broke the big ugly man." Dimitri flinched as if he had been struck by lightning. The absolute hatred in his own son's eyes was a punishment worse than death. "We are not here for your apologies, Dimitri," Madeline continued, her voice ringing out clearly. She pointed a steady finger toward the royal pavilion, where the prize chest sat upon a velvet cushion. "We came for the moonlight nectar. By the sacred ancient laws of the great melee, the victor claims the grand prize. My son defeated your champion in fair combat. The nectar belongs to us." Dimitri looked at the vial of glowing, silvery liquid. He realized instantly that it was her only reason for risking her life in the capital. She needed it for someone else. She needed it for the man who had saved them. "I will give you the nectar," Dimitri said, his voice trembling with desperation. "I will give you the entire kingdom's treasury. Just come back to the estate. Let me fix this. Let me heal the wounds I caused." "The wounds you caused," Madeline said softly, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, untamed light, "cannot be fixed with gold or grand castles. I want my prize, King Dmitri. Hand it over, and we will leave." Dmitri realized in that horrifying moment that he could not order her to stay. If he used force, he would lose her forever, and his son would grow to despise him even more. He slowly turned toward the royal box, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, terrifying retribution. "Bring Lady Catherine down here," Dmitri commanded, his voice deadly quiet, yet it carried across the entire stadium. "Now." 2 guards grabbed the screaming, thrashing noblewoman by her silk arms and dragged her down the stone steps, throwing her roughly onto the sand at Dmitri's feet. Catherine scrambled to her knees, weeping, her expensive powders running in streaks down her face. "Dmitri, my king, please! She is lying! It's a trick!" Catherine sobbed, desperately reaching for his boots. Dmitri kicked her hands away. He looked at Madeline. "5 years ago, you said the wax on the treasonous letters was the wrong shade of crimson. Tell me now." Madeline stepped forward, her presence commanding the attention of every noble in the stands. The Royal Crawford seal uses a deep, iron-rich crimson wax sourced from the eastern mines. The wax on those forged letters was a brighter cherry hue, slightly fragrant. It is the signature wax of the DuPont family's private supplier, imported from the merchants in Bristol. Check her personal ledger. Check the supply lines. You will find the courier she bribed. Dmitri didn't need to check the ledger. The overwhelming stench of sour fear and guilt pouring off Catherine was all the proof his wolf needed. The realization of how easily he had been manipulated, how he had traded his true mate for this conniving traitor, filled him with a blinding, violent rage. "You stole my mate," Dmitri snarled, grabbing Catherine by the jeweled collar of her dress and lifting her off the ground. "You nearly murdered my heir." "Mercy!" Catherine screamed, her legs kicking uselessly in the air. "I did it for the pack. She was weak." "She survived the Whispering Peaks," Dmitri roared, throwing Catherine back onto the sand. "Which is exactly where you are going. Captain Montgomery, strip Lady Catherine of her titles, her wealth, and her warm clothing. Cast her out the northern gates. If she returns, execute her." The crowd erupted in a mixture of gasps and cheers as the guards dragged the hysterical, pleading woman away. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. Dmitri turned back to Madeline, signaling for the royal master of ceremonies to bring the prize forward. The official hurried across the sand, bowing deeply as he presented the glowing vial of moonlight nectar to Madeline. She took it carefully, tucking it into her satchel with a heavy sigh of relief. Tobias would live. "The traitor has been banished," Dmitri said, stepping closer, though he kept his hands respectfully at his sides. "The kingdom knows the truth. The Luna's throne is yours, Madeline. It has always been yours." Madeline looked at the massive, powerful king. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the deep, dark bags of sleepless nights, and the desperate yearning of his inner wolf. She felt the pull of the mate bond, a dormant fire flaring back to life in her chest. But she was no longer a naive girl blinded by love. "If I return, Dmitri," Madeline said, her voice carrying a steely resolve, "it will not be as your submissive Luna. It will not be to sit quietly in the parlor while you rule." "Anything," Dmitri breathed. "Name your terms." Madeline outlined her demands with the precision of a master tactician. First, she would have equal ruling authority. Her decrees would carry the same weight as the Alpha King's. Second, Tobias Fletcher, upon his recovery, would be named the chief royal apothecary and granted a permanent estate within the city walls. Third, Leith's training would be overseen by her. He would not be moulded into a mindless brute for the arena, but educated as a true leader, balancing compassion with strength. And finally, Madeline added, her green eyes locking onto his, you will not sleep in my chambers. You broke my trust, Dimitri. You shattered it into dust. If you want my heart again, you will have to court me. You will have to prove, every single day, that you are a man worthy of my love, and a father worthy of my son's respect. Dimitri slowly dropped to one knee, right there in the blood-stained sand of the arena, bowing his head in absolute submission to his mate. It was a gesture of humility unprecedented in the history of the Crawford pack. I accept your terms, my queen, Dimitri vowed, his voice thick with emotion. I will spend the rest of my days rebuilding what I destroyed. Leith watched the giant man kneel before his mother. The little boy's golden eyes softened just a fraction. He reached up and took his mother's hand. They did not fix everything in a single day. The scars of banishment ran deep, and the road to healing was fraught with painful memories. But as they walked out of the arena, carrying the cure that would save their adopted grandfather, Madeline knew one thing for certain. She had walked into the wilderness as a discarded victim, but she was returning as a fierce, unbreakable queen, leading her extraordinary son into the dawn of a new, untamed era. Are you craving more intense alpha romance, heart-stopping betrayals, and fierce, unstoppable heroines? Hit that like button, share this story with your pack, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Ring the bell to be notified every time we drop a new, thrilling werewolf drama. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Madeline's epic revenge. Did King Dimitri deserve her forgiveness? Drop your thoughts below and stay tuned for the next wild adventure.